gentlemen, join MythVision's Patreon not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision grow. Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald, you have an interesting take on almost everything in the New Testament in many ways. Sometimes you're in line with a lot of what scholarship says, and sometimes you say, sorry, buddy, I see something I think people have missed. And one of these are the wedding at Cana, I think. Can you tell us what you see going on here with Jesus performing water into wine?
Thank you, Derek, for that introduction. And it is a fascinating story, but I want to start in the 5th century with a Greek poet from Panopolis, Egypt. His name is Nonnus. And he wrote later in life the longest of all Greek epics, called the Dionysiaca. And it's garrulous, and it's dactylic hexameters, so it's not like the Bacchae, but it has a Dionysian character that has lots of resemblances to Euripides' Bacchae. And but that Dionysus has Christ-like features. He's more compassionate than Euripides' Bacchae. He doesn't lie and dissimulate in the same way. But he's a major donor deity. He provides eternal life. He provides water and wine. Earlier in his life, the same Nonnus wrote what is known as a paraphrase of the Gospel of John. And it's a paraphrase of John with very few parallels to the synoptics. And he clearly targeted the 4th Gospel in order to tell his story of Jesus in a Dionysian way. So Jesus becomes a donor deity, and Nonnus uses lots of Euripidean, Bacchic imagery and so on. And Jesus is the wine donor. Now, scholars often have wondered, why did Nonnus pick on the 4th Gospel? And my argument is that the 4th Gospel already is an imitation of the Bacchae. And he saw there an opportunity to expand his Jesus and make him even more Bacchic. But what's even more astonishing is he wrote that early in his career, and then he wrote the Dionysiaca later. Does that mean he was a Christian that converted to Dionysian religion? Probably not. It's more likely that he saw Jesus and Dionysus as two features of a donor deity, and wanted Dionysian religion to have more Christ-like characteristics. Now, we also have a story in a Greek novel by Elias Aristides, Clitophon and Leucippe, in which there's a story about how Dionysus introduced wine. And Dionysus was there's a wedding between Leucippe and Clitophon, and there's a story then's told of how wine was first discovered. Dionysus appeared to a farmer who had never had wine, and the farmer offered hospitality to this stranger, and it was water that he provided with the meal. And Dionysus turned the water into wine for both of them. And the farmer was astonished, and he used the phrase, where did you get this wonderful blood. He considered it to be a kind of a blood wine. And Dionysus told him that it comes from the grape and that that's the beginning of wine. Now, classicists have recognized that given the dates, if there's a relationship between this story and the fourth gospel, this pagan author would have known the Gospel of John. And likely, because the same phrase is there, where does this come from? Mm-hmm. And so somebody apparently saw similarities, pagan authors saw similarities between Jesus changing water into wine and Dionysus changing water into wine. So let's go to the fourth gospel. Clearly, the author says the first miracle that Jesus performs is at a wedding, in other words, a celebration of sex with the men and women. The guests drank all the wine and already were drunk. Jesus provides huge quantities of wine after they're drunk in a vintage that's superior. Now, in the Synoptics, what is the first miracle that Jesus does, at least in Mark and Matthew? It's it's in a synagogue, not at a wedding. And he's casting a demon out of somebody as opposed to changing water into wine. So Jesus is a donor deity right out of the box in the Gospel of John. Furthermore, Jesus is the Logos who comes into the world bearing eternal life and gift after gift. In other words, Jesus is a donor deity in the Gospel of John in a way that he's not in the Synoptics. In the earliest version of the Gospel of John, and I'm convinced it came out in 3 different stages, but that is somewhat irrelevant to this topic, we find these Dionysian traits. And I think the author felt that the Synoptics were so hard on Jesus' followers, telling them to carry the cross, to sell their goods and give to the poor, and to set up treasure in heaven, that there really wasn't much that Jesus was offering here on earth.
Yeah, Dionysus, like you said, is offering sex and drunkenness and all this fun stuff.
Yeah, how are you going to compete in the religious marketplace if you say, oh, Jesus wants you to pick up your cross and sell all your goods and give to the poor, when the neighbor is saying, hey, come to Dionysus, he'll give you eternal life, and and he'll give you lots of wine.
Yeah.
And so, in my view, the earliest version of the Gospel of John knows the Synoptics, it's a supplement to it, but saying to the reader, Jesus offers gifts too. And that's why the Eucharist is, you can't have life in you unless you drink his blood and chew his flesh. It's not eat his flesh or eat his body, it's rather chew his flesh. It really is quite Dionysian. Mm. And that's why Nonus wrote the paraphrase of the Gospel of John. He saw the Dionysian traits in the Gospel of John. And so did other authors. The author of the first edition of the Gospel of Nicodemus also certainly did, because you have independent imitations of the Bacchae. Now, these imitations of the Bacchae and so on have been recognized by scholars long before I came on the scene, long before I was born. And some of them were recognized even in antiquity, with Justin Martyr comparing Jesus to the likes of Dionysus, who gives gifts, Asclepius, who gives healing, and so on. So the notion that imitation of classical Greek poetry is MacDonald's invention in the late 20th century is nonsense, because people saw this in antiquity and they exploited it, they accepted it, and they, no doubt, were nourished by it. So a lot of this allergy to mimesis criticism that I think is really quite unfair, as though this was foreign to the Christian ethos and so on. It's just a lazy criticism because there's so much evidence to the contrary.
If I might end on this note, your name is Dionysus.
That's right.
So, Dennis, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope everyone was educated by this. Thanks, Dionysus.